People who go to something to do with arts and culture, so like theatre, museum, ballet, every 2 months have a 31% lower chance of dying. People who only go twice a year have a 14% lower chance of dying. I mean, that's free and easy.
So one of the powerful messages in the book is the story around losing your husband, Robin. And that was the beginning of your journey in many ways as it relates to science. Can you describe the first moment you thought, this is more than coincidence?
Well, I'd like to give you a bit of backstory before I get to that. So the first realization I had was when he actually passed away, which I was present at. As soon as he had actually passed away, I looked at his body and I just had this deep knowing that it wasn't him. I didn't know where he was, but I just absolutely knew that that body wasn't him. And that actually really helped me during the cremation and stuff, because I just didn't identify with the body in the coffin being my actual husband. And then I saw a lot of robins in the garden, both in London and Hampshire. I mean, it was October, but it was an unusual amount of robins. And I noticed it, but it didn't feel like it was enough to directly be like a message from my Robin. And then about 6 weeks after he passed away, I was asleep. And at about 4 a.m., I got woken up by this massive thump to my shoulder. And as my eyes acclimatized to the darkness, I could see him appearing, just be standing full size next to my bed. And I could sense the amount of effort that it was taking to sort of push through to be seen. And he became so visible, I could see the outline of his hair and his face. And then he just dissolved from the top down. And my eyes went with him. And the last thing I saw were his shins and his feet. And I just sort of gasped and I fell back asleep again. So in the morning, I Googled, is it possible to see someone that's died? And Google said 60% of older people can have visual hallucinations after they've lost someone, particularly their partner, and that it's created by the cues in your regular life of expecting to see this person. But I was fast asleep, so I wasn't expecting to see him. And I was very painfully aware that he was absent, all of my waking hours. I told a few people, and I was kind of surprised by the response as I started to tell more people, not necessarily in my friendship group that are, quite spiritual. I started to share it with friends of Robin's. Everyone seemed to have a story of sensing a presence or electrical disturbances or, receiving a sign, whether it's a number or a song lyric. And then it made sense to me about 6 months later that, because he was in finance and he was obsessed with the Fibonacci sequence, that he would try to communicate with me through numbers. And I started seeing like lots of repeated numbers like 1111, which is for twin flames. And I always told him that we were twin flames. And then I started seeing a lot of 4s, 44, and I didn't know what it meant. So I looked it up and it said that it means that your angels are guiding you and you're on the right path. And that meant something significant to me at the time. And then over the years, these numbers came on specific anniversaries or birthdays, and they were just so timely and exact. I would say it took 2.5 years for me to be like in full conversation with him every day if I wanted to.
And so backing up, we've talked a lot about the signs you see. These signs seem to be everywhere and anywhere to a certain degree. Do you think recognizing these signs is a superpower, a gift, a muscle we need to flex and work on and go to the metaphorical gym? Or are we just numb to them? How do you view your ability to see, hear, feel them compared to everyone else's?
I mean, I like the muscle analogy because I think everybody is capable of it. So I don't really like to think of it as a gift or a superpower, because one of the reasons I started to do it was that I did consult a couple of mediums and I was really skeptical. And I ended up thinking, if it is possible at all to have this kind of communication, and this was my closest person, then I should be able to do it myself. And since I've been sharing it with my friends, they've all started receiving signs too, or some of them had before. And it's become more of a normal conversation. And I think that allows the psychological safety for people to delve into it and then receive them.
And how do you reconcile all of this as a doctor? You are a real doctor. You just don't play one on the internet like a lot of people on social media. You are a real credentialed doctor.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I'm a medical doctor and a scientist.
Yeah, you got the double.
I got a double doctor. But I'm also a human being that went through, a very deep and profound human experience, and I had to make sense of that in my life. But I did kind of step back as the neuroscientist and the medical doctor and watch myself going on this journey and question how this could happen. And so, of course, then I delved into the research on near-death experiences and the border of life and death and ancient wisdom and just the nature of consciousness. And a lot of it is stuff that we accept but can't be proven. And I think as a scientist, you actually have to remain open and curious, because there are so many things that we thought were true in science that then later, we understand them differently. So that's how I would explain it.
So, in terms of consciousness, in terms of near-death experiences, our intuition, where do you think we are in terms of the scientific literature? Is it 1%? Like, do we have such a limited capacity or understanding? And I get the rub with science. We like absolutes, and this is an area where there really aren't any.
Yeah, but it's so interesting because the response that I've had has really surprised me in a very pleasant way. But there are literally thousands of people out there that don't like absolutes, that are thrilled that I've come out and said this and validated their own experiences. But of course, I wanted to do that in a way that people would feel safe, that it's backed up by science as much as possible. And so I interviewed Dr. Bruce Grayson, who's written a book called After, which is about near-death experiences. He himself has about 5,000 meticulously documented cases of near-death experiences, and pointed me to the research of someone else who I think has the most in the world, which is about 10,000. So, we're looking at tens of thousands of documented cases by professors of psychiatry on near-death experiences. And there are so many common themes in it. It's hard to deny. And then you've got these high-profile doctors like Dr. Eben Alexander and I always forget her name, but the doctor that was in the Netflix documentary Surviving Death, who have their own experience of it so they can share it like me through the personal lens and through the professional lens. And then intuition. So I've got two chapters on that actually in the book, because in the source where I wrote about intuition primarily as a mental faculty, I've taken that to the next level now with all the research on how trauma is held in the fascia and the muscles, and that somatic work helps to release it. And I've sort of looked at the other side of that coin, which is that intuition, of course, it's held in the limbic system of the brain, but we already knew that it's probably held in the brainstem and the spinal cord and the gut neurons as well. But this new hypothesis called the serotonin hypothesis shows how both trauma and hidden wisdom can be held in the tissues of the body.
So, as it relates to NDEs, I've had Grayson and Tucker from UVA. They literally study this in their lab. Fascinating. The anecdotes will blow your mind, and the work they're doing is incredible. I encourage everyone to listen. I think it'll change your perception of near-death experiences. As it relates to intuition, I think that's really easy because there's that, I forget who really coined the term, but this idea of, the body doesn't forget, so to speak.
The body keeps the score.
Exactly.
Yeah. Bessel van der Kolk.
Yes, I can never pronounce his name.
Yeah. He's Dutch.
So how do we strengthen, how do we recognize the trauma, the fascia, or at the highest level, what we're all shooting for, our intuition? How do we tap into that in our daily decision-making process? What does that look like?
I mean, I think the sort of, age-old practice of journaling is a good way to hone your intuition. And I still think it's a good way, but I think that getting more in touch with your body. So the way I say it to people now who may feel quite disembodied and disconnected, and most people are quite dysregulated in their nervous systems as well. And if your gut isn't in good condition, then it all leads to this lack of self-trust and, not being able to make sense of your intuition. Have you ever had a visceral reaction to something? Have you had a shiver down your spine when you've received some bad news? Have you had butterflies in your stomach? And the most common one related to intuition is goosebumps, or the hairs on your, arms or back of your neck standing up on end. It's actually a phrase that I use a lot, and, my sort of circle of people use when we are trying to say to the other person, like, I felt that really deeply emotionally, like my intuition tells me that's right. We will say, oh my goodness, that gave me goosebumps.
And so I think the example of fear is a very real one, which everyone can relate to, where you're in a situation which is uncomfortable and something says like, I need to go, and that is a gift. I think where I have trouble, and I don't think I'm alone here, even though I would say I try to tap into my intuition, I really try to listen to my gut, I try to stay connected to my body. But every once in a while, monkey mind enters and anxiety, and everything's a sign. And all of a sudden, I'm just lost and I'm reading into everything and getting nothing.
Yeah, I mean, I see this a lot in people, and I sort of call it overthinking.
Yes.
So when you're overthinking, you're actually very disconnected from your body. So I looked to ancient wisdom to see like how our ancestors made sense of the world, of the land, of their place in it, of belonging. And if you think about the fact that in Paleolithic times, we didn't have spare resources for anything that wasn't crucial to survival, yet we drummed and danced and hummed and chanted, made cave paintings. So that somatic work and art as well are ways to reconnect and understand, just make sense of the world, which is basically what intuition is.
And so, what would Carl Jung say about that?
I mean, he was, I think, the pioneer of this kind of work in terms of looking at synchronicities being coincidences that meaningful coincidences, as he put it. He was obviously a psychologist, so his work was much more to do with the mind, the nature of consciousness, inherited brain structures in people that we all have in common. I don't think he, as far as I know, looked too much at somatic work.
No, but synchronicity, this idea of synchronicity, which I think is paramount to the book, that's him.
That's totally him, yeah.
And so, what I want to get to is like, how can we be better at this? You mentioned journaling. I think there is something to be said for our choices as it relates to relationships, our sense of purpose, and how synchronicity plays a role. I'll use me for an example, and easy always to Monday morning quarterback, so to speak. Look in the rearview mirror, and difficult to practice when you're in the thick of it. And so, whenever I'm in a circumstance which is just not a good one, whether I'm anxious or struggling, whether it's something at work or in my personal life or health, I will try. I'll say try to look back in a previous experience where there was a similar worry or concern and see how it ended. And oftentimes there would be a solution or a silver lining that was completely unexpected and unanticipated. And I probably worried and ran myself into an oblivion trying to figure it out when it wasn't necessary. And that sometimes allows me the space to kind of step back and say, like, what's going to happen here? Maybe I need to let go a little bit, or let God, if you will, as relates to synchronicity. That's my practice. It is far from perfect. It is often a struggle. But what's your view on how we can try to step back from whatever we're going through and try to recognize the synchronicity, the greater sense of the greater purpose of what's happening or whatever we're going through?
Yeah, a great question, applicable to so many people. And I also think a very thoughtful answer, but for me, still very rational, because you're relying on things that you can remember, whereas actually your intuition in your body has a lot of store of knowledge of things that you don't consciously remember. So, I think if we think of the terms claircognizance and clairsentience, which are just a deep sense of knowing in your mind or your body that something is, the right way to go. The way that I've built this up over time is that when I feel very negative or afraid or anxious, I will immediately do a gratitude practice to try to reset my nervous system. Because when you're in a dysregulated nervous system in the fight-flight state, you're not going to make good decisions because the prefrontal cortex, which regulates the amygdala, which is the emotional centers, that regulation goes out of kilter. So, you're not as rational as you need to be in those sorts of times. So I find personally that the gratitude practice really helps to just reset my mindset. And what I've also learned over time is that when I change my mindset, the material world changes around me. So when I'm thinking negatively, I fear the worst, I stress about it. As soon as I change my mindset, it's a level of surrender that just knows that things will work out, or even if they don't, that I'm resilient and I'll find a way to learn something or come out of it better or stronger. So I think you can probably see that if that's the way you generally think, it's going to be easier to get yourself out of that state and into a state where you can be positive and take a healthy risk. But I also regularly now do, like either drumming or sound bowls or yoga or Pilates, just to stay regularly connected. And then I think that nature is a really great healer in that respect, so going for long walks, spending time in nature where you're not doing something else like listening to a podcast or music, and just, really getting back in touch with yourself, but also having that sense of awe and seeing that we are part of something greater and we are really connected. And we've really damaged our mental health by severing that connection to nature that our ancestors had. And then I think, it's your tribe or community. So if you're really in a dilemma, then, speaking to someone else and just, getting their opinion, getting their advice. If you add all of those things up, it makes a really sort of supportive, protective network around you of ways to boost yourself back into your best intuition.
So a couple things I want to unpack there. One is I loved your example of the mindset change. Can you walk us through what that looks like for you? Maybe provide an example.
Yeah. So sometimes it takes me days to realize I need to change my mindset.
I think that's real. I think it's very hard to flip a switch.
So for instance, I had someone so after my husband passed away, because I don't know if it's the same in America, but the way the legal system works here, I had to have someone come to my house to value the contents of my house. And I was very apprehensive about this. It was in the early days. It was really stressful. I didn't know what the impact of that might be. It left me very in a state of a lot of uncertainty. And so therefore, my brain made me think that this person was not going to be a nice person. And so just before he arrived, I thought, okay, I can't go into this like so negatively. And I thought, what if he's just a really, really kind, lovely person? And of course, he turned up and he was exactly that. And he looked at photos of my husband and he said to me, he's never going to get forgotten, is he? And I said, not as long as I'm alive. And he was just, really kind and considerate and thoughtful. And it turned out to be a really positive experience.
So how much do you think about, I'll use an extreme example, The Secret. The global phenomenon of The Secret, I think it's happened like two decades ago, and I'm going to oversimplify it, but essentially, if you believe, it will appear. You can manifest anything. Went a little too far in a lot of people's minds. But I do think mindset and belief systems do play a significant role in our reality, in the outcomes. What's your view on mindset, belief systems, and how they relate to creating desirable outcomes?
Yeah, I think this isn't necessarily to do with The Secret, but I think this school of thought that you can create a fantasy life that you want and then sit at home and do nothing and expect that it will just appear is not something I subscribe to, which is why in the source I actually changed vision boards to action boards and said, you can create this imagery. It's got to be somewhat realistic and achievable. And then you have to go and do the things that make those things more likely to happen. But if you think about manifestation as setting a goal and moving yourself towards achieving that goal, then it's not as fantastical as it might sound sometimes. But that aside, I think that your belief system drives your thoughts, and your thoughts drive your behaviors, and your behaviors become patterns. And so you do really need to dig down to what it is that you believe about yourself that makes you expect negative outcomes or feel that you don't deserve certain things, and work on that. And if you do that deep work, then I definitely think it changes what happens in your life. It would change the kind of partner that you would attract. It would change your confidence in your professional life. It would probably change the way that you look after your health and fitness. And obviously that would then have good consequences. So yeah, very much believe in beliefs and thoughts and mindset being really important, but also feel like you have to do a lot of hard work to get that into the right place.
Well, I love the source and I love action boards. I think Jim Carrey famously said once, you can't just manifest something and then go lie on the couch and eat a ham sandwich. Like you have to do the work, and therein lies the action board. So how do you think about people who are listening who are trying to really dial in their health And we live in an amazing era. I'm wearing my Whoop. I've got my Aura. I do my lab work tomorrow. I can, I know my VO2 max. I do all these things, and it's important. And we tend to manage what we measure. But what we're talking about here, I can't get any data on my intuition or how my trauma is impacting my emotional health. Of course, that stuff will show up in labs, but how do you view? I think many people in this world we live in today, which is very data driven, and that's great. I think, in my view, ignore the emotional and spiritual component because they simply can't measure it.
I completely agree with you. I am personally very interested in this sort of, massively booming area of longevity. So a short while ago, I mean, I also wear an Aura ring, but before, like a few months ago, I would have said, I mean, I get bloods done annually just as a proactive health check, that I'm not obsessed with having a broad level of bloods done, all these AI scans that you can have now about your health. For me, it's about going back to basics. For me, it's about me understanding the state of my body and my health and tweaking that accordingly. And I think there's almost a bit of a backlash in that there are these sort of themes coming out now, which I really like, which is creatine more important than community? Is biohacking more important than belonging? I think absolutely not. And what's been really interesting to me is that quite a few of these large longevity clinics have approached me to work with them, even though I clearly say that I'm less interested in the data and I'm more interested in connection to nature. I'm more interested in the health benefits of art and beauty. So, for example, people who go to something to do with arts and culture, so like theatre, museum, ballet, every 2 months have a 31% lower chance of dying. People who only go twice a year have a 14% lower chance of dying. I mean, that's free and easy, and there is a bit of data with it. But I also kind of disagree that we don't have data around our intuition. I feel like I have very strong data around my intuition, which is all the decisions that I've made in my life that have turned out to be really good ones that I just made from a deep sense of knowing.
What do you think most people go wrong there? They ignore that gut instinct, or they're possibly numb to it because they're so disconnected?
I do think people ignore it sometimes because we prize logic and rationality over things like emotions and intuition. And that sometimes it's because if you had to give an explanation of why you made a certain decision, you could feel ridiculed if you said, well, I just felt it in my gut, kind of thing, especially professionally. But then I think the biggest example to me of not listening to intuition is when people are at that stage where a relationship is ending, but out of fear of being single or, because they've invested so much in it already, they stay. And so, there are red flags there. They feel it in their gut. They may even become anxious or become sleepless, but they stay in this relationship. And, when you look back, there were probably several months or even years that could have been saved from, all the anxiety and angst and disruption that was caused by staying in a relationship, which clearly was not going to last.
I think that's the toughest one for so many people, when to walk away from a relationship where you've invested so much time.
Yeah. And that, obviously that's because there's emotions and hormones involved. And in the community chapter, I've written about the genes and brain receptors and hormones that are involved in romantic relationships and also in breakups and loss through, death and grief, and how that works in the brain. So I do think it's a case of us all becoming a bit braver to trust that intuition, because it really is so powerful. And there is more scanning technology now that, shows how emotions and intuition and creativity work in the brain. But I really think this idea of combining the brain and the mind with the embodied intuition allows people to trust it more, because it's just very, very powerful. And you can demonstrate to yourself repeatedly that when you do trust it, the outcome is good.
Jason Walkup here, founder and co-CEO of mindbodygreen and the host of the mindbodygreen podcast. Please subscribe. You'll never miss a show and you won't regret it. Where do you think the science is going to be in, say, 5 years, 10 years?
Well, I think with this, massive rise of AI, especially in the last couple of years, that the only antidote to that for us is, because that's not going away and we are going to have to live with that. And it's, a good thing in many ways. But the answer for us is to become more human. And to me, that means more creative, more intuitive, more emotionally regulated, more embodied.
And for someone who's listening, who's maybe saying, yes, 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 maybe I think I've experienced some coincidences. Maybe I've seen or thought I communicated with a relative who's not with us anymore in my dreams, or maybe I was awake and they're skeptical. What advice do you give to this person?
So, this is where I talk about the observable universe. So, basically, we know that the universe is either infinite or boundless, but we can only see as much of it as it takes light to travel, so as far as the speed of light. But we fully accept that the whole rest of the universe that we can't see is there, and that over time we will be able to see more of it. So, I mean, that's a huge thing to accept when you absolutely cannot see it. And there are other things in science that, we used to think it was one way and now we know it's different. So, when I was at medical school, we didn't know about neuroplasticity. And we genuinely thought that by the time you got to about age 18 and you stopped growing, that your brain was fixed for the rest of your life. Now we know that your intelligence, your emotional intelligence, your intuition, your creativity, these can all grow and change throughout your life. And there's a few really high profile cognitive scientists that have, David Eagleman, for example, has said this idea that the brain is like a radio that can receive signals. It can't be proven, but it categorically cannot be disproven. And Donald Hoffman says that, we accept space-time as the construct of the universe, but we can't actually prove that. And he suggests that consciousness could be the construct of the universe. Daniel Siegel spoke at the same conference as me recently and said, love could be the construct for the universe. I mean, it's so amazing to see these iconic scientists, pushing that boundary. It's exciting for me. It gives me permission to do that as well. So I think I would just say we don't know everything. A lot of the things that we thought were true turned out to be completely the opposite of what we thought. And like I said, staying open and curious is the way to potentially expand our consciousness. I mean, Bruce Grayson said that he believes that the brain actually filters down the capability of the mind so that we can exist on this material plane.
So, building off of the need for connection and community, and you talked about consciousness, if you were to think about the people you spend your time with and how you think about energy, how has that changed in terms of who I hang out with? When I think this room feels good, when this room doesn't feel good, have you become more protective around your space and who you spend time with? Oh, you're nodding.
100%. I mean, I have probably always been conscious of who I spend time with, but now I am just surrounded by so many people with just such good energy, so caring, so loving, so generous. And I just don't have the bandwidth to have anyone in my space that isn't like that. And so, I mean, I don't, but I also did write in the book about, you have to prune a rose bush for new roses to grow. And the brain prunes away neural connections to allow the ones that you need to flourish. And so, what I've said is that sometimes friendships or relationships, they have their season and that's okay. You can wish the other person well, but if it's not energetically good for you, then it's actually better for you to not have that relationship in your life.
Agreed. So you end the book with a call to live, quote unquote, without limits. Can you talk more about what that means to you?
Yeah, I think it started, very personally with my story of someone gave me these 52 postcards that were prompted journaling cards for grief. So they had things like, if a famous actor were to play the person that you've lost in the movie of their life, who would it be? And so when I, couldn't journal, couldn't do anything, I could answer some of those questions. I still haven't actually finished them all, but so I used to look at this account on social media. I didn't follow it because I hadn't decided to share my private story for quite a few years, but I became very interested in the comments from people because I knew that these were people that were in the same situation as me. And sadly, what I saw was that I would say 60 to 70% of the nature of the comments was, I will never, ever get over this in my life. It's so unfair. I feel so bitter. And I just looked at that and I thought, I don't want to be like that. And so I made a very conscious choice to return to joy and to love and sort of, uh, have an open heart and just be so grateful that I'm alive. I mean, I watched someone that I love lose their life that the person I know wanted to live for a lot longer. And endure like such brutal treatment that didn't work. And so I just feel very, very grateful that I'm alive and I'm healthy and, wanting to do whatever I can to give anything that I've got to the world to, sort of help other people who maybe have, go through a similar situation to me. I've actually forgotten your question.
I loved your answer. What do you think happens when someone dies?
I think that the soul or spirit or psyche or energy or whatever you want to call it returns to, again, I'm going to use a broad range of words because it has resonance for different people, to Godhead, to the universe, to the collective consciousness, to source, and is still very much present, but I think probably just on a different astral plane. And I want to share a story with you. I was with my friends who work at To Be Magnetic. I was with one of them. She was driving me back to the place I was staying in the Hollywood Hills. And I said something like this about, I just think he's on a different astral plane. And we literally turned onto Astral Drive.
I love it. It's our kids ask us questions like this, and our 6-year-old asked. We're Christian. They go to Sunday school, and she asked the woman at Sunday school, what happens. And I was, because she asked me, and I was like, I don't have the capacity to answer this at the moment. This is a good question for your teacher. And she said, well, that person is in your heart, and they're like sparkles. They're like little, sparkles. They're sparkles. They're with you. They're everywhere, and they're in your heart. And I was like, oh, that's such a lovely. I'm buying what you're selling.
Totally. That gave me goosebumps.
No, totally. And on a personal note, the only, I'll never forget is my father unexpectedly died from a heart attack when I was 19. And, cried for a number of days, took a long time to get over it. But I will never forget being, by the time there was like 4 or 5 days between his death and the funeral. And so I'll never forget being in the funeral service and just having an overwhelming sense of gratitude, an overwhelming sense of peace that everything is going to be okay. It was just like during that service. It's still like in retrospect took me a couple years took a while to get over it. But like during that period, I'm looking around and everyone's like a mess. But I had this like inner knowing, and that's always stayed with me.
At such a young age, that's really impressive.
Yeah, and I can't just. It's still hard for me to describe and wrap my head around because I also like years later was immature and drank way too much and a lot of the trauma lived on for a while. But it made me think, like hearing your like this idea of knowing, if you will. Not to say it doesn't hurt, not to say there's not real grief and there's real sorrow and you miss somebody. So in closing, what do you do in the morning, in the evening, the bookends of the day? How do you start it? How do you end it? Because whatever you're doing, you have such a sense of peace that I think a lot of people are drawn to.
Thank you so much. So as soon as I realize that I'm awake, before I can think about, what do I have to do today? What should I wear today? I start my gratitude practice and I make it very tangible. So I'm lying on a silk pillowcase. So I give gratitude for my silk pillowcase. I'm lying on a side sleeper pillow. So I give gratitude for that. And I just say, I love my bedding. I love my mattress. And then, so my phone is like several floors down from my bedroom.
Several floors.
So my living area is downstairs. So I come downstairs and I take my probiotic and then I have to wait 10 minutes before I can have my cup of tea. And I don't look at my phone until then. So that's pretty much the morning. And then in the evening, where I sit, I can see my husband's ashes in the container. So I usually will sort of like talk to him in my head or out loud. I have a wind down routine from 6 p.m. where I dim the lights and I have blue light blocking bulbs in my bedroom. Yeah, and I just chill out and relax. Or I'll be spending time with, people that I love. And I want to add something in because you asked about the bookends, but something that's become really important to me during the day is noticing beauty. It's like an elevated form of gratitude practice. So throughout the day, I'll notice the fall leaves or the spring blossoms or an impressive building. And, I'll comment on it very consciously.
Awe, the practice of recognizing awe. I think so many times we just get caught up in like, I'm guilty of this, just going. I'm in a rush, a lot to do, not stopping to smell the roses, so to speak. So everyone should buy the book. It's called The Signs. Another runaway bestseller from you. I love all of your work. In addition, other than the directive to buy the book, what else should people do? If there's one thing, one takeaway for our listeners that's going to have a meaningful impact for them, what advice do you have? What's that one thing?
I would say that if you've lost someone, or if you just want a sign from the universe, then think of a fond memory that you have of your lost loved one, or a joke that you had together that only you and they would know. Think of a symbol, choose a symbol that represents that, and then ask them to send you a sign and see what happens.
Beautiful. Tara, thank you so much. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, always a pleasure too. Thank you.